The USDA just accused the state of Washington of launching a war on agriculture. And you know what? They're right. What they did is what we call overreach, lawfare. Of course, the Washington Department of Ecology's director is making the claim that the USDA's remarks are misleading. This isn't just the King Ranch, guys. Secretary Rollins is taking these battles seriously and head on. From the Potter Valley Dam removal, to the Henry Farm in New England, to the Maude case in South Dakota. She's letting these politicized agencies know that they cannot push around rural farmers and ranchers anymore. Because here's the thing, if Washington can criminalize normal ranching, it can happen anywhere in the United States. This one case could completely reshape the entire West. Let's get into some of these details that have unfolded over the last couple days. Let's break down the bombshell that just dropped in Olympia and the significance that it has on ranching across the West.
Every day, more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that our society is simply unhealthy. We've been being fed poisons and being told to put poisons on our body by corporate America for years. A lot of the things that we've been told were bad for us, like animal fats, are actually good for our bodies. Your skin is the largest organ of your body, which is why on Yanasa Co., we're pleased to offer you guys Bison tallow lotions and creams. These Bison tallow lotions and creams are amazing. They're not made by a big corporation. They're made by a homesteader, just like you guys, our friends out of Canada, Dr. Nathaniel and Susan Ostashowski. We've visited numerous bison ranches and farms and parks across the entire continent of North America. And these are some really great people who have come up with some really great products, and you can buy them on Yanasa Trading Co. and support this program and support your health all at the same time.
Yesterday, December 9th, Secretary Rollins did something that almost no federal official has done in years, decades. She openly rebuked a state agency for attacking family farms and ranches. She said that they were inappropriately targeting, issuing over $250,000 in fines, revoking 70-year-plus legacy leases, and then hiding everything behind a criminal investigation so that the farmers and the ranchers could not represent themselves. They couldn't defend themselves. You know what? It goes beyond this. The state of Washington has adjunct 30,000 water users in court to make them prove that they have water rights. They've fined over $120,000 to an 85-year-old hay farmer. And if you watched my interview last week, this is a pattern that goes well beyond the examples that I've talked about on this channel. Anyway, these are not the types of things that federal agencies normally put in a letter to a state agency unless things have gone really wrong. Like I said, she called it a war on agriculture. Those are her words, not mine. Quote her exact, a clear assault on those who feed, fuel, and clothe the American people. So let's get into what sparked this federal smackdown. Stockwater ponds. That's right. Man-made ponds. The same exact type of ponds that ranchers across the West have been maintaining for over a century. Washington woke up one day in their bureaucratic agency and decided, you know what, we're going to start calling those stock ponds wetlands. They issued a bunch of fines and threatened a small family ranch with criminal persecution. And it is persecution, not prosecution. According to the experts, the USDA, who's supposed to know what a wetland is and what a stock pond is, as well as numerous experts that have been hired to come into the property to run tests, have all said that the state's claims are completely nonsense, that there's nothing natural about these ponds. Of course, Washington's not going to sit back and take Secretary Rollins' letter quietly. No, they responded very quickly, actually. The executive director, Casey Sixkiller, fired back. He said that the USDA was trying to mislead the public and essentially sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. We're a state agency. He even went as far as insisting that the Department of Ecology tried to resolve the situation. They tried to resolve it by, getting them to admit on record that they had done this so that they could press criminal charges and pay the $267,000 fine. To him, that's a solution. We'll get more into that in a second. Everybody is calling for a much colder, stormier winter. What does that mean for you? Well, it means that there could be possible power outages and some very long, dark days, because as you know, the days are only getting shorter from here on out. Yanasa Trading Co. has finally launched its bee yard collection. This is where we're going to be selling some of our honey as well as some of our other beeswax products. We currently have natural beeswax candles for sale on Yanasa Trading Co. These candles last about 10 hours each. They're clean burning. Unlike paraffin candles that put toxins into the air, beeswax candles actually help neutralize the air. So when you are sitting inside for long periods of time, the power's out, you're having to use other heating resources, beeswax candles can help with air quality inside your home. Not to mention they'll give you plenty of light. We only use beeswax candles in our household because we care about our health, we care about our children's health, and we like the smell of warm honey in the dead of winter. Check out Yanasa Trading Co. and order your beeswax candles today. But first of all, who is Casey Sixkiller? I think this is important to know because understanding the messenger from this agency is just as important as understanding the message itself. Before taking charge of the Washington State's Department of Ecology last January, mind you, this case goes back to 2021, so it hasn't really been that active this year. What he's getting involved with, he doesn't really have the background information on. But, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. Casey Sixkiller spent nearly 15 years as a DC lobbyist. In fact, he's co-founder of a large DC lobbying firm. You guys wonder who his clients are? That's always a good one. They're not farmers. They're not ranchers, obviously. And they're also not water rights groups. He lobbies for private prison companies, oil and gas firms, defense contractors, surveillance tech firms. A little scary. It's your typical Save the Wetlands coalition, right? And there's a small detail in all of this that qualifies him for the executive director role of the Washington Department of Ecology. He has absolutely no ranching background, no farming experience. He has no grazing management experience, doesn't even know what it is. He has absolutely no history at all with water rights. He has no connection to rural land stewardship. He doesn't even have connection to public land stewardship. He doesn't have any connection to any of these things whatsoever. Perfectly qualified person to be sitting in the job. Yet this is the man who is the state's authority on deciding on whether or not a 100-year-old legacy ranch should be able to continue operating business or go to jail, whether or not they're illegally maintaining stock bonds. And here's the kicker. He inherited this entire mess. He didn't witness it, but yet he's absolutely certain the USDA is wrong and misleading. The guy who is completely unqualified for the position he's in is absolutely certain that the people who have all of the expertise are misleading. That's interesting. According to the Kings and their attorneys and everybody that's close to the matter, Washington State did not try and work with them whatsoever. They didn't try and collaborate with them. They didn't try and offer solutions. At one point in time, the Department of Natural Resources did. In fact, they thought they were one of the greatest tenants that they had until the Department of Ecology stepped in and forced the Department of Natural Resources to go along with this screwy agenda. What they did was they threatened criminal prosecution. They issued crushing fines, the same thing that they've been doing to other farmers and ranchers across the state. They created a legal environment in which the Kings couldn't speak up to defend themselves. A gag. They kept them from talking for years. And while they had them gagged, they won a preliminary injunction without having to prove a point and without the Kings being able to defend themselves, which kicked them off their leases, kicked them off their land. That is not negotiations, Sixkiller. That is government overreach. That is power being used to silence people. It happened to yours. According to Jamie Griffo in my interview just a few days ago, the Attorney General's office refused to release the criminal investigation so that the Kings could speak up and stick up for themselves. And yet this Attorney General never actually pressed charges. They just brought the criminal investigation in order to silence the Kings. This was a strategic move. If this truly were an issue of, wetlands or whatever, there are ways to resolve it. But these massive fines and threatening jail time is not a method of resolving a situation, Sixkiller. Every single expert, and I'm sorry, Sixkiller, I can't say you're one of them, but every single expert who actually does have a background in, water quality, land management, grazing, public land management, every expert, aside from the agency, who set foot on the property to investigate confirmed that the ponds were man-made, confirmed that they are stock water ponds, confirmed that they are not wetlands. They also confirmed that there was zero environmental harm and put, quite frankly, the state's claims do not hold up to anybody other than the people that are working in this agency under the person who is the least qualified for the job. One of the experts, Dr. Garth Baldwin, actually went as far as saying this: the state's cultural claims were tantamount to offering once upon a time as scientific evidence. It's a fairy tale, folks, and DC lobbyists are running the show. I wonder, with all his energy groups and stuff, what they could want the land for in Washington. I think it's important to remember, when you go to the real experts, the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, that they had absolutely no problem with the Kings for decades. Never. And this is something that's been maintained for decades. They had no problem with the way they managed their land and thought they were excellent stewards of the land. Those are all in the reports. It's all part of the King's evidence. DNR staff called them model stewards. Nobody ever raised concerns. No one ever said maintaining ponds required some sort of special permit. And in fact, they didn't. That's why the Department of Ecology is trying to create the permit now. They're creating the permitting process for the permit that didn't exist. When the Department of Ecology got involved in this whole thing, everything changed. The lobbyists running the organization took everything over, pressured the DNR into the situation that they're now in. Now, some people would argue that the USDA should not be involved in a state issue. And for most of the time, I agree that the federal government should leave states alone. But there are caveats to that. You see, the state of Washington and its departments like the Department of Ecology and Department of Natural Resources receive billions of dollars in grants from the federal government every single year to operate, to pay the salaries of their unqualified executive directors. These funds go to agriculture, to conservation, wildfire mitigation. They also go towards rural development. You can't take the money from the federal government and then reject the federal government's expectations like people's constitutional rights. You don't get to say, give me the money, but then question the way that the federal government wants you to treat the agricultural producers who are growing food for Americans across the United States. This isn't just a one-off situation. 5 days before Secretary Rollins sent this letter to the Department of Ecology of the state of Washington, she also sent a letter to Dr. Rich Brazil, who is a veterinarian out in Potter Valley. I had him on this channel before. You can listen to my interview with him. In Potter Valley, the state's governor, along with PG&E, want to take down a dam. By removing that dam, not only would they impact the Thule elk population, which they've already increased the hunting on to depopulate to take down the dam, but they would also kill hundreds of thousands of salmon, destroy salmon spawning beds, and they would make it virtually impossible for agricultural production within the entire Russian Basin area. In Secretary Rollins' letter, she said that the plans to remove the dams entirely would absolutely cripple farmers and drastically increase wildfire risk. And Secretary Rollins, I want to just add on to there, the Thule elk population is very important to protect our wildlife. U.S. Forest Service. She's gotten involved with the Henry Ranch, the Maude case, nobody else would get involved with. She put an end to it, both of those situations. And from what I understand, she works with many other producers facing regulatory issues. They just might not be as public. This is an emerging pattern. Secretary Rollins is building a national rural defense strategy. And she's got her aim at state agencies who are using environmental policy, environmental laws, not for the use of conservation. No, they're using them to choke out agriculture. Now, what exactly did she threaten the state of Washington? She threatened to remove the money that's funding the paychecks for the unqualified executive director and everybody else in the agencies. They depend heavily on the funding that the United States government gives them to operate their agencies. And by operating their agencies for anything other than conservation and, taking care of our natural resources, which includes working with farmers and ranchers, to use that agency as a weapon against agriculture is to use that agency as a weapon against the hand that feeds it. You don't do that. And like I've said 1,000 times before, the King Ranch is not about ponds, it's about precedent. It's about precedent on whether or not a state can rewrite the rules. If normal ranching practices can be criminalized, if it's okay to silence families from sticking up to themselves under the threat of prosecution. If it's okay for these state agencies to completely ignore science, ignore history, and ignore the federal government altogether. If the state of Washington were to succeed, no rancher, no family farm, no rural resident in the state of Washington or anywhere in the West would be safe. If Secretary Rollins didn't make these steps to stick up for farmers, ranchers, and rural America by shutting down the funding that's going to these corrupt agencies with unqualified personnel, if she didn't do that, then nobody in America would be safe. It would just keep spreading.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.
Check out the Buffalo Wool Company collection at yanasatradingco.com.